Brandon suddenly slammed his hand down on the table. The sound of glasses clinking against each other rang out sharply. He leaned toward me. His face was flushed from alcohol and contempt. "You're a loser, Dad. Julian isn't. Look at yourself. Those outdated clothes. And that run-down house in West End. Do you really think you deserve to sit at the same table with us?" Brandon laughed loudly. His arrogant laughter echoed through the upscale restaurant. "Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a drink, some snacks, make yourself comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one." The story began with the sound of jazz music flowing through the gleaming windows of Harlow Restaurant. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and pretense. I sat silently at the corner of the table. My old worn jacket looked completely out of place among the glittering outfits around me. Across from me sat Eleanor, my ex-wife. Beside her were Brandon and Chloe, the 2 children I had worked so hard to raise. And of course, there was Julian, the man Eleanor always praised as the savior of her life. Right in the formal atmosphere of the restaurant, the son I had spent most of my life raising, caring for, and teaching openly, humiliated his elderly father. I said nothing. I simply looked straight into my son's eyes. There was not a trace of respect in them, only disgust and contempt. Beside him, Chloe began to clap. My younger daughter clapped slowly, 1 beat at a time. The sound of her applause felt like buckets of cold water thrown directly in my face. She looked at me with a mocking half-smile. "Brandon's right. You should know your place. Don't embarrass us in front of Uncle Julian." Eleanor took a sip of red wine. She glanced at me out of the corner of her eye. It was the look of someone superior gazing down at a pitiful creature. I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. Beside her, Julian casually adjusted the collar of his expensive suit and wore the contented smile of a victor. My chest tightened, not from heartbreak but from disgust. For the past 15 years I had stood behind all of them. I had silently endured their coldness. I had watched them spend the money I had earned only to receive this humiliation in return. Calmly, I set my fork down. I slowly folded the white napkin into a neat square. Then I stood up. The chair scraped lightly against the stone floor with a dry sound. I glanced across the 4 faces turned toward me. Faces filled with self-satisfaction. I did not argue. I did not explain. I turned around and walked away. Behind me, the laughter of Eleanor and the children erupted once again. They thought I was running away in shame. Their arrogant laughter faded behind the thick glass doors of Harlow Restaurant. The cold night air filled my lungs. A valet looked at me with pity in his eyes. He glanced at my worn, outdated clothes and then looked away. He probably thought I was waiting for a late bus, or worse, a cheap taxi. But he was wrong. I pressed the smart key in my pocket. A few yards away, a black Rolls-Royce Cullinan flashed its lights. The $280,000 vehicle sat silently like a creature of the night. Its engine started with a smooth purr. It breathed softly, like a powerful living beast. I stepped inside. The premium leather seat embraced my body. Its warmth stood in stark contrast to the coldness and lack of affection I had just faced from my children. I pressed the accelerator. The vehicle glided through the Manhattan night. The city sparkled with lights, but to me it was nothing more than chaos. I looked into the rearview mirror. My face was frighteningly calm. For the past 15 years I had played the role of a struggling failure. Eleanor, Brandon, and Chloe had always believed I was barely getting by in a shabby, leaking apartment in the poor West End district. They believed it because they wanted to believe it. They needed someone to blame for their past failures. The vehicle came to a stop in front of a skyscraper. It was home to the city's most exclusive luxury hotel and penthouse residences. Silas, the building manager, was already waiting. He approached, respectfully bowed, and opened the door for me. "Good evening, Mr. Vance. Have a wonderful night, sir." Silas's respect was genuine, not because of the money I possessed, but because he knew who I was. I stepped into the private elevator reserved for the penthouse owner. The elevator rose smoothly to the top floor. The doors opened. A vast living space with floor-to-ceiling glass walls stretched before me, offering a panoramic view of all of New York City. This was my home, a world of luxury that Eleanor could never touch, even in her dreams. Julian, the successful man she admired so much, was nothing more than a debtor buried beneath a glamorous facade. I walked over to the bar. The contrast between the two worlds was almost laughable. On one side was the table where I had been humiliated at the restaurant. On the other was the pinnacle of wealth itself. They despised me because they thought I had nothing. They used the very stability I had provided for them all these years as a platform from which to trample my self-respect. I picked up my phone. The screen lit up, displaying a name that was already selected in my contacts. It was time to pull back the curtain. It was time for my beloved children to learn where the money that fueled their arrogance had come from. The truth about the empire behind me was going to cost them dearly. I set my phone down on the marble countertop. I was in no rush to make the call. Revenge is like a fine aged wine. You have to savor it slowly. I gazed through the ocean-like glass walls of the penthouse. The city lights shimmered like gold coins. None of this had appeared by accident. 50 years ago, I was just an 18-year-old kid with nothing to my name. I wandered the streets of New York with a relentless ambition. I founded Soul City Records in a damp basement that reeked of mold. Back then, music was my life. I signed unknown artists. I spent countless sleepless nights at the soundboard. I built that empire with sweat and blood. The biggest turning point came when the digital era exploded. While other record labels panicked and sold off their assets, I did the opposite. I quietly bought up and held onto entire music catalogs and their copyrights. I knew the world was going to change, and I was right. When the streaming era took over, those songs became endless money-printing machines. Every morning when people around the world woke up and turned on their music, my accounts quietly grew. Millions of dollars flowed in without a sound. True wealth is usually silent. It does not need the roar of customized luxury cars. It does not need expensive designer labels on display. It resides in ironclad legal agreements that I control. Eleanor always believed Soul City Records had gone bankrupt long ago. She thought I had been left with nothing after the divorce. That was the greatest mistake of her life. The truth was that I remained the ultimate decision-maker behind the scenes. I controlled enormous trust funds. Those very trusts had been quietly sustaining the luxurious lifestyle of Eleanor and the children. Brandon had his downtown apartment because of my money. The BMW he drove was paid for through approvals I signed. Chloe was able to attend an expensive MBA program because of anonymous checks issued from my trusts. They lived on my support yet believed they were standing on their own. They worshipped Julian because he gave them a few expensive luxury gifts. What they did not know was that much of the money Julian used for his investments was also connected in one way or another to my financial network. I gently swirled the wine in my glass. My patience had reached its limit. I had given them every opportunity to be good children. I had given them every opportunity to respect a father they believed was poor. But they had chosen cold-heartedness. They chose to kneel before a fraud and trample on the man who had given them life. I glanced at the clock. It was 11 o'clock at night. I opened a highly confidential blue folder. Inside was a special clause I had put in place 5 years earlier. A clause capable of taking everything away from them in the blink of an eye. I opened the blue folder. The bold print immediately caught my eye. It was a list of recurring payments from the trust fund bearing my name. Each figure stood out clearly. Brandon's luxury apartment in downtown Manhattan was paid for through monthly distributions. The payments for his new BMW, along with its insurance and maintenance costs, also came from the same source. I turned to the next page. Chloe's MBA tuition worth tens of thousands of dollars each semester was listed there. Alongside it was a fixed monthly allowance of $4,500 deposited directly into her account. Their entire luxurious lifestyle had been built under the name of an anonymous benefactor. I had done all of it. I wanted my children to have the perfect launchpad in life without ever having to worry about money. My chest tightened. Bitterness rose into my throat. It was a feeling of profound resentment. They used the financial stability I provided to look down on me. They used my money to buy expensive clothes and then mocked their father's worn-out jacket. They used the security I gave them to gain status in high society and then used that very status to push me out of their lives. Brandon believed he had earned that apartment through his own abilities. Chloe believed her intelligence was the reason her education was funded. Eleanor believed that her lover Julian was the one taking care of everything for the family. They were living inside an illusion that I had allowed to exist for years. They enjoyed the privileges while denying the source of those privileges. To them, I was nothing more than a stain, an aging failure barely surviving in a run-down corner of West End. My kindness had been turned into a weakness for them to exploit. I looked at a photograph of Eleanor and the children smiling during an expensive vacation. I had paid for that trip as well. In the photograph there was no sign of me. They had erased me from their family long before they humiliated me at Harlow Restaurant. A faint smile crossed my face. It was the coldest smile of my life. Arthur Vance's patience had finally run out. I had given them unconditional love. In return, I received only betrayal and contempt. It was time to bring my children back to reality. It was time to see how they would manage when the secret stream of money from this so-called loser was no longer supporting them. I picked up my phone once more. I found the number of my personal attorney, Raymond. My finger did not hesitate. I knew this call would set in motion a chain of delayed explosions that would sweep away everything they possessed. The phone rang through the stillness of the penthouse. After only 2 rings, someone answered. Raymond's warm professional voice came through the line. "I'm listening, Mr. Vance." I knew he had always been ready for this call. For the past 5 years, Raymond had been the only person who had witnessed everything I endured. He held every legal key to the financial empire that stood under my name. I took a deep breath. The last traces of hesitation had vanished after the humiliation at Harlow Restaurant. My voice was cold and direct. "It's time, Raymond. Shut everything down tonight." The line fell silent for a second. I could hear the faint rustling of paperwork. Raymond was not surprised. He simply let out a quiet sigh filled with understanding. "Are you certain, Mr. Vance? If I activate this clause, their lives will be completely overturned within hours." I looked out the window toward the brightly lit towers of Manhattan. "I'm certain. Freeze all the trust funds. Stop paying Brandon's apartment rent. Repossess the BMW he's driving. Cancel Chloe's tuition funding and monthly allowance. I want everything executed before 6 o'clock tomorrow morning." Raymond replied in a firm voice. "Understood. I'll coordinate with the banks and all involved parties immediately. Their financial access will be completely locked down." I ended the call. The phone lay motionless on the marble table. An unexpected sense of relief washed over me. This punishment was not born from hatred. It was born from fairness. I had given them every opportunity to behave like people with a conscience. Instead, they chose to trample the father who had raised them. They chose to idolize a fraud like Julian and treat me as a pathetic loser. Now it was time for them to learn how to stand on their own without my money protecting them. The clock struck midnight. Darkness settled over the city. I knew that within a few hours a devastating storm would sweep through the artificial luxury that Eleanor and the children had built their lives around. They would wake up in a completely different world. A world where powerful black cards became worthless pieces of plastic. A world where privilege vanished like a dream. If you've been listening for a while and would like stories like this to keep coming, it would really help if you hit the like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this channel going. I walked toward my bed. Tonight I would sleep well. The sleep of a man who had reclaimed his dignity. But their nightmare was only beginning. The ringing of Monday morning's alarm clock would be the opening gunshot of the collapse. The first domino had already fallen. It would begin when Brandon walked toward his car the next morning. Monday morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse. I sat at the dining table, slowly sipping a cup of hot black coffee. I did not turn on the television. I did not read the newspaper. I was waiting for a familiar sound. And at exactly 8:30 a.m., the phone on the table began vibrating violently. The screen displayed Brandon's name. I let it ring 5 times before calmly answering. The voice on the other end no longer carried the arrogance of the spoiled son from Harlow Restaurant 2 nights earlier. Instead, it was a flood of chaos and frantic breathing. "Dad, do you know what's happening? A team of people just showed up at my apartment. They said the lease has been terminated because the sponsor stopped making payments. They're throwing my belongings out onto the street. And that's not all. My BMW was just towed away. They said the bank repossessed it. Dad, you have to help me. I don't understand what's going on." I leaned back in my chair. My expression did not change. My voice was detached and calm. "Why don't you call Julian? He's the hero, isn't he?" Brandon fell silent. He stammered into the phone. What are you talking about? What does this have to do with Uncle Julian? Dad, just send me the money so I can fix this. I'm standing out here in front of everyone. I did not answer. I quietly ended the call. My silence was the cruelest answer I could give him. 5 minutes later, the phone began vibrating again. This time it was Chloe. My younger daughter's voice trembled with panic. Dad, I'm at a cafe near campus. My credit card was declined. I can't even pay for a $10 coffee. The school administration just called me. They said this semester's tuition hasn't been paid. If the money isn't received today, I'll be suspended immediately. Dad, please check the support fund. Is there some kind of banking error? I slowly shook my head at her innocence. They still believed this was a technical problem. They still refused to accept that the poor old man from West End held the power to determine their lives. I answered in an even tone. I don't know anything about banking systems. I'm just a loser, remember? Then I hung up. The Monday morning nightmare was unfolding exactly as planned. Their collapse was happening so quickly that neither of them had time to react. Years of self-confidence had transformed into complete confusion. But what they did not realize was that this was about more than losing an apartment or a car. When the secret flow of money from my trusts was cut off, a massive financial void was exposed. And that void was not limited to Brandon and Chloe. It was already spreading like a cancer, reaching directly toward the artificial kingdom built by Eleanor and her lover Julian. Brandon and Chloe were now racing to Julian's office, desperate for help. What they did not know was that an even more devastating domino trap was waiting for them there. The engines of the taxis roared as they carried Brandon and Chloe straight to Julian's office building. My children were clinging to what they believed was their last lifeline. They were convinced that their mother's wealthy savior could easily throw a few tens of thousands of dollars at the problem and make everything disappear. Panic had blinded them. They stormed into Julian's office without waiting for an assistant to announce them. The oak door flew open. But what greeted them was not the sight of a successful executive calmly in control of his empire. Julian was frantically gathering documents from his desk. His face was ashen. Not a trace of color remained. Several leather suitcases sat open on the sofa. He was hurriedly stuffing confidential files and bundles of cash inside. Brandon rushed forward and swept a stack of papers aside. Uncle Julian, you have to help us. My apartment has been locked down. My car was repossessed. Chloe's cards have been frozen. Please lend us some money. Julian did not even look at him. He shoved Brandon's hand away roughly. Get out of my way. I don't have time for you two. I've got bigger problems. The moment my trust funds stopped distributing money, a devastating domino effect began. For years, Julian had secretly used the names of my subsidiary companies to secure enormous loans from international investment funds. He had used the monthly cash flow connected to my network as fraudulent collateral. When I pulled the plug on the financial system at midnight, every one of his loans was immediately classified as overdue. Banks moved at once. Emergency collection orders were activated across the board. Julian believed I had uncovered every detail of his fraudulent activities. He believed I was working with investigators to send him to prison. The fear was so overwhelming that it shattered whatever composure he had left. He wanted only one thing: to gather whatever cash remained and flee the country before any travel restrictions could be imposed. All it had taken was a single thread. I pulled it, and the entire fraudulent empire collapsed. Chloe stood frozen. She stared at the man she had once admired. Now, he was trembling like a rat trapped in a corner. Julian slammed one of the suitcases shut. Then, he shoved both children aside and rushed toward the rear emergency exit. He abandoned everything. He abandoned his company. He abandoned his debts. And he abandoned Eleanor. I sat in my penthouse watching the building's security cameras stream footage to my computer. A faint smile crossed my face. The main course of this punishment had finally been served. My phone vibrated again. This time the name on the screen was Eleanor. There was none of the superiority of a high society wife left in her voice. All that remained was the desperate scream of someone who had just fallen into an abyss. Eleanor's voice shattered into choked sobs on the other end of the line. Her usual arrogance had vanished completely. In its place was pure terror. Arthur, please help us. Julian is gone. He took all the money and disappeared. The police just raided our house. They said Julian is involved in a massive financial fraud scheme. The FBI has frozen all my assets and bank accounts as part of the investigation. They're about to seize the Beverly Hills mansion. I don't know where to go anymore. The children and I have nothing left, Arthur. I stood by the bar. Slowly, I poured myself a glass of the finest bourbon. The ice cubes clinked against the crystal glass with a sharp, satisfying sound. I watched the amber liquid shimmer beneath the lights. The feeling was strangely satisfying. It was the finest drink I had enjoyed in years. I raised the phone to my ear. My tone remained calm as though nothing unusual had happened. You should call your hero. I'm just a loser. Eleanor stopped in the middle of a sob. She could hardly believe what she had heard. Arthur, how can you be so cruel? Brandon and Chloe are your children. They're standing out on the street right now. Are you even human anymore? A faint smile crossed my face as I took a small sip of bourbon. Its warmth spread through my mouth. Yes, they are my children. But they chose to humiliate their father in order to worship that fraud. You taught them that money was everything and that a poor man like me was unworthy of respect. Now let your winner save you. I ended the call without another word. The collapse of the Beverly Hills kingdom happened even faster than I had expected. For years, Eleanor had taken pride in her upper-class lifestyle. She had used that artificial wealth to conceal the emptiness within herself and to look down on me. Now that glamorous facade had been stripped away, she was being forced to confront enormous debts that seemed to appear out of nowhere. She was being forced to face intense questioning from FBI agents. I set the glass back on the table. Every domino had fallen exactly where it was supposed to. Half of my punishment was complete, but I knew the story was not over. Brandon, Chloe, and Eleanor still had no idea who was truly behind everything that had happened. They believed it was simply bad luck brought on by Julian. They had not yet experienced the shock of discovering the truth about the so-called loser they had spent years mocking. Another call came in from Raymond. The authorities were requesting my presence at the station to clarify several financial provisions connected to the trust funds. I straightened my collar. It was time for me to appear. It was time to see them again, and it was time to bring this entire drama to its final conclusion, once and for all. If you've followed the story this far, then it has probably stirred some emotions. Please take a moment to help us out by hitting like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you made it this far. Many people watch without doing so, but it costs nothing and means a great deal to us. The Rolls-Royce Cullinan came to a stop in front of the police station. I adjusted the cuff of my tailored Tom Ford suit. Stepping out of the vehicle, I caught the faint glimmer of my Patek Philippe watch beneath the streetlights. Raymond, my loyal attorney, was already waiting. He nodded respectfully, before pushing open the door and leading the way inside. I followed at a measured pace. The confidence of a true owner showed in every step. The office door opened. The scene inside was complete chaos. Eleanor sat slumped over the table. Her hair was disheveled and her eyes were swollen from crying. Brandon and Chloe sat beside her in miserable condition. Their clothes were wrinkled. Their usual arrogance had vanished. Only confusion and fear remained. The moment I entered, the entire room fell silent. Brandon looked up. For an instant, it seemed as though he was about to make another remark about my appearance, just as he always had. Then he froze. His eyes locked onto the perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit I was wearing. His gaze dropped to the watch on my wrist, worth more than he could have imagined. Chloe's mouth fell open. She rubbed her eyes, as if she could not believe what she was seeing. This was not the poor old father they had mocked at Harlow Restaurant. Raymond stepped forward and placed a thick file on the investigator's desk. His voice rang through the room, shattering the suffocating silence. Ladies and gentlemen, I represent Mr. Arthur Vance, chairman of Soul City Records and founder of the trust funds that have supported this family. Raymond then turned toward Eleanor and the children. His voice became sharp and cold. For the past 5 years, Mr. Vance has been your sole source of support. Every apartment payment, every vehicle expense, every tuition payment, and every monthly allowance came from him. He continued providing for you even while you repeatedly insulted him and called him a failure. But as of tonight, all support has been permanently terminated. Eleanor looked up at me. The shock in her eyes was overwhelming. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. The truth struck her like a devastating blow. Brandon and Chloe sat frozen. The color drained from their faces. At that moment, they realized they had personally destroyed the only lifeline they had ever had. They had used their father's money to finance their contempt for him. I stood quietly. I looked directly into my children's eyes. There was no anger, no resentment, only profound disappointment. I did not say a single word. I turned and walked out of the room. The silence behind me was absolute. The sound of my shoes against the floor echoed with finality. I stepped back into my car. The vehicle disappeared into the night, leaving behind the desperate pleas that were only now beginning to rise from behind me. But the story was not truly over. 1 month later, another unexpected event would test my resolve once again. 1 month after that devastating financial storm, I was sitting in my office inside the penthouse. It was a quiet, peaceful New York afternoon. A small envelope had just arrived on my desk. The sender was Chloe, my younger daughter. I opened it. Inside was a short, handwritten letter and a check for $200. The letter contained no pleading and no excuses, only a belated apology. Chloe wrote that she was now working 2 part-time jobs to support herself and pay off her debts. The $200 represented the first money she had ever earned entirely on her own. She wanted to send it to me as an act of repentance. I stared at the check for a long time. I did not cash it, but I did not send it back either. Instead, I tucked it into a small notebook and placed it inside a drawer. Some doors are never fully closed, but that does not mean you can easily walk through them again. The best punishment is not eternal hatred. It is allowing people to face reality and correct their own mistakes. Brandon had moved into a small rental room on the outskirts of the city. Every day he took the subway to work. Eleanor was struggling through legal proceedings and had been forced to sell the last of her designer handbags just to maintain her lifestyle. All of them had learned the true value of life in the most painful way possible. My family's story is a clear reminder of the value of humility and the cost of ingratitude. In this world, the people who are truly capable and truly wealthy often choose silence. They do not need to show off to prove who they are. And most importantly, never judge a person by appearances. Gratitude is the foundation of everything good. When you betray the people who have quietly supported you, you are cutting off your own path forward. Never mistake kindness for weakness. If this story touched your heart, thank you for spending your time with Dad's real-life revenge. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you won't miss the next valuable lesson. See you in the next video.